Hey everyone, welcome back to the CyberHub Engage podcast. Your host, James Azar. We have a very special episode today because it's not very often that I get to bring someone on the show whose podcast I listen to. And I do have that person with us today, Chris Cochran. He's the threat intelligence lead at Netflix, and he's also the host of the very popular SecDevOps.ai podcast. So for those of you looking to start a career in cyber that want to have a more technical podcast, his is one of the more technical podcasts to listen to because it talks about SecDevOps. Chris, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for letting me on the show. Glad to be here. Looking forward to a great conversation.
Absolutely. I'm really excited about this one because you have a really, really interesting background. And I'd love if you could share a little bit with us about your podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. So my interest in computers started when I was young. In high school, I had just transferred schools. And there were kids in a program where they were getting their CCNAs. So they would go, it was like a semester-long program. And I missed the cutoff. And so I was speaking to one of my friends that was in the program. And I said, how do I get into this computer stuff? And he said, go buy a book. So I took my school clothes money to actually go buy an A-plus book from a CompTIA A-plus book. And I read it cover to cover like a novel. And it just sparked more questions about technology and computers. And so I would get older computers and tinker around with them, take them apart, put them together, things like that. And my mom was not very happy that I took my school clothes money to buy a book. But in the end, you know, things worked out for the better. And so that kind of led me down the path. When I was going into the Marine Corps, originally I wanted to be a scout sniper. And I took the ASVAB and I did pretty well. And they said, you did so well in the ASVAB, pick your job. And so I chose intelligence as my job field. When I got into the Marine Corps, went through training and all that, they sent me to the National Security Agency for my first like real duty station. And eventually I got to a digital networks intelligence job. And that gave me, like, that reinvigorated my desire to be a part of technology, to be a part of computers and networks and things like that. I got out of the Marine Corps. I went as a contractor to United States Cyber Command for 5 years. We were doing this thing called all source analysis. But what I didn't realize was this other job field, but it was exactly the same thing as I was doing for the government, was blossoming in the commercial space. And they called it threat intelligence. So I decided that after I left that role, I would start my own company doing threat intelligence and building these capabilities for organizations. I went around, working for different companies, and I was a consultant for a few different companies. I was at Mandiant for a while and Booz Allen Hamilton, and then ultimately ended up here at Netflix, where I, lead threat intelligence. They give me the opportunity to dabble in things like purple teaming and other operations, and that's where I am at today.
Awesome. Thank you for that. So before we continue, though, I do want to take a quick commercial break for our sponsors because I was so excited to just get into this. I totally forgot about our loyal and dedicated sponsors to the podcast. So we'll just take a moment and get our listeners to hear about the great services these guys have for our listeners. Hey everyone, I really want you to help me in supporting our early sponsor, Get Smart Eye. So Get Smart Eye is still in beta testing, but what Get Smart Eye is, it's an amazing app that lets you control your privacy, whether it be documents, pictures, anything that you want to share with your friends or not. Think of Snapchat, only no screenshots and no one else looking over it. So if you travel a lot, if you're in airports, coffee shops, shared workspaces, and you care about your privacy, Get Smart Eye is the right app for you to protect your privacy. And here's the deal. Get Smart Eye is still in beta testing. I use the app all the time. In fact, some of you know that I travel a lot, and when I do, I don't like people looking at my screen at airports. I do everything off my phone, and as such, I use Get Smart Eye for all my sensitive documents and all my planning. So here's what you need to do to be one of our early technology adapters, an exclusive offer for CyberHub Engage listeners. Text 41411, again, that's 41411, 41411, and type in the message of your text, Smart Eye. Then reply to the SMS that you're going to get with the letter Y, like Yankee, and download the Apple Test Flight app. Then go back to your SMS and you'll get a link to download the Smart Eye app. Download the Smart Eye app and use it. Again, this is an early offer for only CyberHub Engage users. Text 41411. Again, that's 41411 with Smart Eye in the message. So Chris, kind of getting back into how you started really talking about threat intelligence, and you're leading the team at Netflix, and you kind of started an entire business as you in threat intel. What does threat intelligence really mean for an organization?
For me, it's providing the context of the threat environment. So everything that's going on outside of an organization that can affect the health and well-being of that organization. So, and it's usually threats from a cyber perspective. You can get into a bit of the physical space, but that's really dependent on the organization size and makeup and the security program. But from a general perspective, it's threat intelligence looking at all the threats that can happen within context to the internal environment.
You know, so threat intel is always kind of like its own team. But really, it should be a wider part of a mature cyber program, because it does, it's not a vertical. Rather, it's horizontal, not a vertical. I don't know. I'm confusing myself here. Way too much whiskey last night. It was a Jewish holiday, and it's been an early morning. So, what are some of the best ways to really implement your own threat intel program within a cyber program?
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that. I actually put together a framework called the Threat Intelligence, or the Intelligence Easy button. E is a list of requirements, A is assess collection plan, S is strive for impact, and Y is yield feedback. But you're absolutely right in terms of it being able to be integrated into different functions, not only within the security team, but in general with an organization. And luckily, I've been in so many unique scenarios where we would actually take threat intelligence and support a stakeholder in a really creative way. But I've always looked at threat intelligence as a service-centric function. So you're supporting other people's roles. You're giving them information to enable them to make decisions, to close gaps in security posture, and make the organization better.
So, you brought up a really good point, which is giving people information so that they can make the right decisions. How, for a lot of people and a lot of different CISOs, they look at threat intelligence as not always an exact science, but more of a possible prediction. How do you really concrete and verify the information you're getting and seeing in order to really give someone faith in the intelligence you're gathering to give them in order to make the right decision?
Right. The reason I really like threat intelligence is it's half science and half art. There has to be a fusion between the two. And where you start with good data. That's always the primary. You start with good data when you're doing analysis. And this is everything from data from your stakeholders, like what are their requirements, data that you're collecting outside of the scope of within your company. So are you looking at premium sources? You're looking at open sources, like where are you getting your data from? And then you come up with a way or a framework to evaluate the validity and the impact of the information that you're getting. That's like kind of step one. And then once you start to put together these narratives, which is the art part of it, you're building the story in which you need to tell a stakeholder, and that's supposed to inspire them or incite them to make a decision or have a viewpoint with the threat in mind. I think that's where you really begin.
So, it's interesting because oftentimes when you look at building a threat intel team, you've got kind of the vendors on the outside that are trying to give you service. You try to leverage that with an internal team. But how would you build your ultimate threat intel team?
Ultimate threat intel team would be a diverse intel team, diverse in many ways, but definitely diversity in thought. People that are more research minded, that really are passionate about vulnerabilities and exploits, things like that, up and coming emerging threats. But then also you need folks that are able to speak to executives, right? You need people that are able to distill really complicated things into verbiage that is digestible by all sorts of different people. Even if you are, say, a threat intelligence program where you're a service provider, you're trying to give out information. If your research is fantastic, but it's not conveyed in a seamless way, in a digestible way, it's going to be lost. So having a blend of those skills is really, really important. And then it also really depends on what you want your threat intelligence capability to do. Some capabilities only want to do the technical. They only want to support IR and vulnerability management. Some organizations, they just need someone to keep the CISO abreast of all of the threats that are coming down the pipe, because they speak to the board on a weekly basis and they don't want to get blindsided by something that is going on in the news. It really depends on what you want to do. And that's why I like threat intelligence, because it's so pliable.
It feels like almost if you have a good CISO, you're giving them the intel briefing every morning, kind of like POTUS, right? Sir, right. Here's the intel briefing of all the conflicts that are going on around the world. And in cyberspace, those conflicts are intertwined in our IT network landscape, right?
Yep.
And so, when you look at threat intel, and you're building the team, I know that IT and infrastructure and architecture all comes into play, but what's kind of like the secret? What's the other part of it that most people aren't paying attention to that they should be in threat intel?
So this applies not only to threat intel, but I think any team that does anything, and that's really forming an identity around the team. So one thing that I walk through with any team that I lead is sort of, have you heard of Simon Sinek's Start With Why?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, so I sort of walk my teams through that exercise. Like, we try to get to what is our purpose? What are we actually trying to do? And then extrapolate all of our tasks and functions beyond that. So whenever we get off base, if we're doing something that isn't going to support that main purpose, it's something we have to re-look at and see if that's something we need to keep. But yeah, especially for a threat intelligence team, because I feel like people get stuck in the, hey, let's just read open source and just send it on to our stakeholders with no additional massaging, no additional what is the assessment, what is the so what. And I feel like if you change your identity and like, we are proactive, we are tailored, we are the bespoke threat intelligence capability for this company, you're going to look at threats with a more company or organization centric viewpoint. You're going to say, this is interesting. What's going on just came out today. Why does this matter to our organization? And what can I put in this narrative or this story to make people kind of perk up and listen, and then also do something about it?
It's interesting because when you think of cybersecurity, right, and I kind of want to talk about a career path in cyber. Oftentimes, when you're on these forums on LinkedIn and Facebook and Twitter, a lot of people want to go to ethical hacking, the pen tester route. And I feel like the secondary careers are developed within the time that someone becomes a pen tester, and all of a sudden he realizes, well, this really sucks. You either really got to love pen testing,
right,
or you got to go find to do something else. So what's the right career path for someone interested in threat intelligence who may not have the same background that maybe you and I have, where we come from a military point of view, where we were trained by, I think, the world's best, and go into these roles, but more the civilian side of it?
Yeah, so I think when you're first getting in, that's the time you need to play around. You need to dabble. There are different CTFs for different fields and functions within security. Just try it out. See what starts to fit. See what, you know, grabs your interest, and you start to dive down this rabbit hole. And before you know it, you found your niche. You found the thing that you want to do for your career in cybersecurity. So definitely exposing yourself to different facets. Don't feel like that you have to do, you know, what everyone else did. Don't feel like you have to go, you know, serve on a help desk for 5 years. Don't feel like you need to, you know, be an ethical hacker in order to get in. Dig around, because you're finding that there are pathways to starting what you want to do sooner. Because you remember, you know, back in the day, all they had was computer science programs for most universities. They didn't have networking or cybersecurity. And so now you're getting to the point where people can dive right into cybersecurity, or even more specific things. You can dive into policy for cybersecurity.
But do you agree with that approach? Do you agree that someone should be able to directly dive into cybersecurity rather than maybe start with a computer science or an IT background? Do you think someone should be able to dive right in?
Yeah, I think so. I think if you have a certain mentality, you can dive into wherever you want to. Like if you really obsess over, let's take something that's extremely difficult, like malware analysis,
right,
or reverse engineering. If all you know is that, but you don't know, you know, something basic from a cybersecurity analyst point of view, what does it really matter? If you are an expert in what you do, like you know the ins and outs of malware, but you don't know who APT33 is, like, does that really matter altogether? I don't think so.
You kind of bring up a really interesting point, which is there's a lot of noise around universities and different cybersecurity programs. It was really interesting. A few weeks ago, I was in Augusta, Georgia, at Fort Gordon, and I was speaking to the dean of cybersecurity at Augusta University, who's really working kind of with Army Cyber Command and White Lawn and a bunch of the other organizations there. And he was talking about we want to build a computer science cybersecurity program. It's a podcast we just released literally this Saturday.
Okay.
And, you know, he had the voice of Sean Connery, so it was very hard to argue with him. Right?
Yeah.
But I kind of disagreed with him and going, why? What does computer science really have to do with cyber? Because at the end of the day, it's a component of cyber, but cyber is just so much more. The human element cannot be ignored in cybersecurity.
Correct.
How does the human element play into threat intelligence?
So it's everything, in my opinion. It's everything from the way you communicate to people. It's looking at problems from the aspect of protecting people, not just protecting assets or capabilities. I completely approach it from a complete humanistic standpoint. Like, how do I protect more people? When I look at the cybersecurity skills gap, how do I get more people into cybersecurity? When I look at, you know, us doing our jobs better, I don't look to technology. I look to passion. I look to what are ways to learn skills, you know, have job satisfaction, more enjoyment, get better, and everybody just protect better. That's how I look at cybersecurity.
So we're seeing more and more threats, and obviously the news are never good in cyber. If your name's associated anywhere on the news, you're a victim of something.
Right.
What kind of uptick? What are you seeing as an uptick in cyber activity and threats that maybe are starting to become more and more, I guess, rampant within organizations? What are you seeing right now going on?
Just from a general standpoint, the bee's knees back in the day was advanced persistent threat, right? APTs. But now everything's so interconnected, and there's money in data, and there's money that resides in data. So now you have this entire treasure trove that cyber criminals want to attack, and they want to either get your information that they can sell, or they want your money in general. And so the cyber crime arena has exploded. You have organized crime now that can rival some, APTs, for lack of a better term. So cybercrime has definitely grown over the last years.
So I think there's always this indication that cyber criminals are after data. And you brought up two very, very good points. I actually wrote them down. There's money in data and then there's money in data. But a lot of times people are after money. They're not really after data. You're going after data if you're hired by someone to get something for the most part. Or if that data has a specific value, like credit card data. If I can get it and skim it fast enough before anyone picks it up, I can make a ton of money off of it, but it always comes down to money. How do we start changing that mindset along, I guess, the executives, right? Because when you're talking to executives, a lot of time they're so concerned with, we want to protect our data, our customer data, our employee data, our IP. But really, you're like, yeah, but you're ignoring your bank account. You're ignoring your vendors. You're ignoring the main lifeblood of any business, which is money. How do you start to kind of transition that thought process?
I think it's starting to transition now, even just on its own, because, I mean, I can't remember when it was, but think back to really when things started to kick off in the 2000s with talking about threats, like on, big media outlets. That was only really recent that it became so mainstream. And so now you're starting to see all the scenarios that can happen in cyber to sort of inspire people to think about these problem sets. So as third-party management becomes more talked about in the space, people are going to start thinking about third-party management more often. Like, what are the mergers and acquisitions factors I need to be thinking about from a cyber perspective as I go on this M&A? I think that's already starting to take place. But I think it's just starting, it's like a slow trickle out to the people that are really in the know.
So it's interesting because the only people that scream about money is FBI and Secret Service. and it mostly comes in the form of business email compromise. How does threat intelligence really pick up on BECs?
Yeah, so that's a tough one. BECs are very interesting from the standpoint of you have a lot of folks that are doing it, and just the economy of scale enables them to do real damage in the industry. And so from a BEC perspective for intelligence, you want to look at if there's any targeting of your infrastructure, from these folks, because a lot of them aren't technical. Some are, but a lot aren't. And so they don't mask their activity as much. And so you want to see if you're being targeted, because once you're targeted, there is a TTP where you infect one box and then you sit in their inbox and you see who else they're talking to. And then once you see where the money is starting to flow, you reside in that inbox and you set, delete rules for those emails that are coming in that are legitimate. And then you're going to, forward yourself that invoice request. So then you can actually doctor it up. And then you're going to send it to your bank account, wherever it is around the world. If you can use intelligence to see that, okay, we're being targeted by these actors, then you can start to think, okay, what do we need to do to have better controls over our invoicing process? What are the better controls we can use from a payments perspective? That's how I would start to look at it.
So a lot of times you're only as strong as your weakest link, right? I mean, and that's true in almost every aspect of life.
Yep.
And our general weakness in a lot of organizations is sometimes, people always say it's humans. And I go, true, but it's never really humans within a company, because a good, mature company will have a failure rate for phishing tests. And I personally hate the phishing test concept of awareness. I hate those numbers when someone they go, well, 25% of our people failed the phishing test. And I'm like, but that's not indicative of anything to me personally. Now that for other people may view it differently. I see it as kind of more of a false sense of compliance, if you know what I mean. Like, it's just, we did a phishing campaign because we want to be able to report it to the board. We want to be able to report it to our executive team. We want to say we did something. But I feel like our weakest link is our small businesses that support our big business. Mm-hmm. Because they're the ones that don't really invest in security because they don't think anyone's targeting them. But as you know, in threat intel, the easiest way for me to get to you is to go to one of your trusted vendors and swim upstream that way. How do enterprise businesses start to really address that small business weakness in the supply chain?
I think it's by being collaborative. I think when you work with a small business, you're not only getting some value from them from a business perspective, but you're also building a relationship. And if you're fortunate enough to have a mature security program, I don't see anything wrong with, asking about their security posture and saying, hey, this is sort of how we secure this type of data. How are you guys looking to secure this data? Or even putting it as a requirement in your contracts, just saying, hey, look, this is the sort of standard we uphold. Could you guys, attempt to do something similar, or at least make this threshold? Because I think it would cause some headaches for the vendor themselves. But in the end, I think that once everybody's on the same sheet of music from a security perspective, the business is easier to maintain going forward.
So that's a really kind of good way to look at it, is how do we kind of contribute to it from a corporate citizen standpoint of helping these businesses? Because I feel like I want to say that most small businesses don't want to become victims of hacking.
No, I don't think any business wants to be a victim, right?
For the most part, you could argue that. I think some people are just relentless in thinking that this would never happen to me, that they're careless in that perception of it. So it ends up happening to them. It's just
right.
I've met enough small businesses to where they go, oh, no one will ever want to come after me. And I'm like, until one day they do.
Right.
And then when that happens, then what?
Yep.
Right. What do you do then? And that's really interesting. As you're looking at some of the up and coming technologies, what technologies do you think are going to change cybersecurity for the better, that are going to improve security?
The thing that I'm probably most interested in, actually, there's two things that I'm really interested in. One is orchestration that has grown a quite big deal over the last few years, because that's going to enable fewer people to do more, right? It's going to enable technology to sort of help you close loops, whether you're doing an investigation or you're doing vulnerability scans. Like, there's technology that can help you close that stuff. But then also, I think we're getting to a point where, and people will still consider this a buzzword, but as artificial intelligence or machine learning, really getting with data scientists to sort of help attack these problems at scale, because I think this threat environment is getting bigger and more pervasive. So I think being able to take data and reuse it in a way that helps us better protect our organizations and ourselves is going to be huge in the future.
So you kind of brought up AI and machine learning, and yes, you're right. A lot of people consider them to be buzzwords. I have an email filter that if I get an email that has AI/ML, it goes directly to my spam, because and last week someone explained this to me very beautifully when they said that, ML is a version of AI. It's just the least it's a least developed version. It's kind of like a Nissan Leaf, whereas in full-fledged AI is a Tesla.
Right.
Yep. So you got the Nissan Leaf. Yeah, it's electric, but it drives like you're on a horse in a carriage. Whereas you got a Tesla that you put it on autopilot, and all of a sudden you can, cruise down the highway and just really eat your hamburger the right way.
Right.
Two hands. You don't have to worry about making a mess because the car drives itself. How do you tell the difference between an ML in the AI from your perspective, and what applies more to threat intelligence? Do you feel like you need a little bit of both, or is AI the real future of threat intel?
I'd say AI is the umbrella, and machine learning is specific to like data models and things like that. I think that they are sort of like genre and movie versus complete opposites on the spectrum of what something is, like you kind of put as a car. I think that we are in our very nascent ability to do anything in artificial intelligence. I think the theoretical limits are amazing and awesome. When are we going to get there? Will we get there? Is still a question to be answered. But I do think there are some really intelligent people working on that problem set, and I do think that eventually we'll get there in cybersecurity.
So I have this theory where I say whatever we get our hands on, the bad guys got their hands on too. And then just as we're using it for defense, they're using it for offense.
Yeah, I agree.
Does AI malware scare you?
That's an interesting question. I bet you someone could do like a theoretical research paper on that. Yeah, that'd be
Don't give me ideas,
insane.
Chris.
No, that's interesting. Yeah, because I remember back in the day when people were just starting to talk about polymorphic worms that had ransomware, and then bam, we had something like that. And that was like literally, it seemed like a week or 2 weeks before, but between me knowing that was a possibility to someone doing it at a really basic version. But yeah, that is scary, because if you have artificial intelligence, that's something that could reside, on a network, just soak up data, and it's just constantly getting better and getting better. Because it kind of reminds me of the polymorphic, viruses that we learned in school and stuff like that. But yeah, that would be something. Somebody's working on it, though. I bet you.
There is actually. We were doing a bit of research a month and a half ago when we ran into different kind of, I want to say, concepts of malware AI. Right. That's malware powered by AI that essentially studying your defensive posture in order to understand how to launch and drop the malware load into your system. Jeez. So it's just essentially analyzing it. And I had a conversation earlier today with the godfather of antivirus, John McAfee, and one of the he said a while ago, he goes, the traditional antivirus is dead because it can no longer recognize the very advanced malware.
Right.
And that kind of brings up the whole thing is our defense kind of, we're saying, we always say, well, cyber hygiene, put your antivirus, put your malware detection. Mm-hmm. Is that even a real possibility anymore?
I mean, you still want to catch the simple stuff.
Right.
But there's other stuff that you probably need to do from a behavioral perspective in order to not get got, for lack of a better term. So, how are you surfing the internet? What kind of precautions are you taking when you're opening email? Are you downloading random games from random places? And, are you going to websites that could potentially be compromised? So, like, just from a behavioral standpoint, doing those things is half the battle. The other stuff is good and nice because you want to protect yourself from the simple stuff. But ultimately, if you are a target and you become a target of opportunity, and somebody wants to get in bad enough, they're going to keep going until they do.
Well, I always say if someone wants to get in, there's very little you can do to stop them because they're just going to keep trying.
Keep trying.
Eventually, they're going to succeed.
Yep.
And unfortunately, in today's world, that's easier than anything else. It's so easy.
The good thing is that even though they might have gotten past prevention, detection's next. So focusing on do you have the visibility within your network to keep yourself safe and then track that threat down before it has the chance to do something impactful?
So, a buzzword, zero trust.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone says we have to live and be in a zero trust environment. Is that really possible and doable?
All right, you broke up there a little bit.
I'm sorry. Can we really live in a zero trust world within an organization?
I think the zero trust model works from a few different perspectives, but I think ultimately zero trust might be a misnomer because eventually you trust something, right? You know, whether it's an identity or an appliance or a token or something like that. You eventually trust something because you enable that exchange of data to occur. But I think there's something really awesome about zero trust is that it sort of puts you from a frame of, look, let's treat everything the same until they have a chance to authenticate. Because there was that I think minimizes the attack surface for an organization, if that makes sense.
It does. I just feel like, and again, my personal opinion on zero trust is you can't really have employees. You can't really build a company if you have no trust. And what I mean by that is you can say, I don't trust this or this exchange. But as we've recently seen, everyone talks about MFA. Well, now it's been proven that hackers can actually breach MFA. They can actually overcome different MFAs. So, like you said, I can trust a token, I can trust an MFA code. That doesn't mean that it's still authentic. It just creates a deeper problem. And I'm not trying to pin you in a corner to say zero trust doesn't work or it's not a good model. I'm just saying there's so many flaws in zero trust that I feel like we should just get rid of it.
That's interesting. What would you replace it with?
I don't have the answer for it. I just know that
that'd be a company, right?
That would be a company, and if it was, it would work. I feel like though that's one of those buzzwords, right? That I think needs to fade, which is zero trust, because you can't have zero trust and run an organization, exchange data, hire employees, get rid of employees, trust your vendors, trust your suppliers, trust your customers. All of that involves trust. I can't hire Chris if I don't trust Chris.
Right.
And I can't have Chris be productive in my environment if Chris has to go through 4 steps just to be able to access the most basic of data that he needs to do his job.
Yeah.
Eventually that gets frustrating. Eventually you leave.
Absolutely. Yeah,
right?
Absolutely. Yep.
So that's why I feel like that model is just, it's predicated on this whole concept of, well, trust, no one. And then there's the people who give you the Reagan line, right? Trust but verify. And and I'm like, okay, but we live in a virtual world. And trusting and verifying in the virtual world is really easy. And we saw that today, where the report out of the UK said that the Russians hacked the Iranians to launch attacks that the Russians wanted, but make it seem like it was the Iranians doing it.
Right.
So if you had zero trust, you wouldn't trust any of it. And if you had a little bit of trust, you'd think it's the Iranians. And if you did a little bit of research, you'd find out it was the Russians.
Right. Yeah. No, I mean, that's a good point. I mean, this is the world we live in. I think we're just figuring out how to operate in it. It's so young, and it has so much further to go.
What buzzword do you think needs to fade in the cybersecurity industry?
Data driven. I think it's got to go. I mean, I think if you look hard enough, anything in the world is data driven. Any decision you make, any application that you deal with, any service that you build, any threat intelligence capability is going to be driven by data. If it's not, it's driven by fairy dust. So I think data driven is one that we could probably do without.
So Data driven. You're the first to say data driven. Most of the time, CISOs will say AI or zero trust or, one of those key magic words.
Right.
Do you set up a spam filter for data driven emails?
No, I just don't check them. I'm the worst. I'm the worst at email hygiene. One day I want to get to zero inbox. I don't know if you know anything about that.
I have no clue what that is.
Yeah, so zero inbox is where every time an email comes in, it goes somewhere. It either goes to an archive because you just want to keep it for later. It goes into a task because you have to get something done, or it gets deleted. Like you always do something with it, and your inbox stays at zero.
So that's Micah.
Okay, yeah.
That's Micah. Me? I have 15,000 unread emails that are just
I got like
sitting
50,000
in my inbox.
Yeah.
He's got 3. Micah's he's like, I only got 3, and that's because I've been on this podcast for the last hour.
Yep. Wow.
I was at a round table last week, and that was one of the things that came up was how many emails do you have in your inbox? And I'm like, I got spam filters set up. I navigate stuff to different. I still get 15,000 emails that are unread between all my emails combined. That's just, it's not realistic.
Right.
So it's October. We're at the tail end of October. It's National Cybersecurity Awareness Month, and it's a big month. What have you done this month to raise awareness?
Yeah, I would say the biggest thing I've done is just push on our podcast. We were really bringing on some good guests that are doing great things in the space. I want to continue to push stuff on LinkedIn. Just really getting the word out and not getting the word out in a dreary, sad, or negative way, but really getting out in a positive way, right? So let's just get better, together and sort of solve some of these problems and try to take it from a positive light rather than a negative light. Because I think, some awareness stuff, you do have to get real and you have to say, things aren't great. These are the people that are attacking us. This is what they want from us. And people need to know that stuff, but mix it in with, what can we do to be safe and help each other and be positive in the light of cybersecurity.
What's your top awareness tip?
You're not getting a free iPad. Don't click that link that's saying that you're going to get a free iPad. Don't surf to the page to put your information in. It's all that shines and glitters is not gold.
I like that. You're not getting a free iPad. That's how I get Micah every time. I just send him a message and I go, "Hey, Micah, free Chick-fil-A sandwich." He clicks that, I get everything.
Oh man, I love Chick-fil-A.
We all love Chick-fil-A.
Yeah.
It's hard for me to find one person that you travel a lot, I assume, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Go to an airport. The busiest place is always a Chick-fil-A.
Always.
It's got a line before it opens, and there's a line all day long. There's never a point where you go into. It's like In-N-Out.
Right. It is. Like
In-N-Out opens at 10 a.m. At 10 a.m., there's 7 cars in the drive-thru and 10 cars
just waiting
for a burger at 10 o'clock in the morning because they don't do breakfast.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. I love In-N-Out too. I love food too much.
I'm a native Californian, so I grew up on In-N-Out.
Yeah.
I was in California with my wife for the first time, and we were in Los Angeles, and we didn't get a chance to get In-N-Out the whole time we were there, but our flight was at 1 p.m. Or 12-ish or so. So on the way to the airport, I said, we got to get In-N-Out. She goes, it's 9:30 in the morning. I'm like, they open at 10, and I was one of those guys that was at 10 a.m. in the parking lot, get me In-N-Out, get me In-N-Out. We got In-N-Out at 10 a.m. Then we went to the airport and got on the flight, and my wife looked at me and she goes, we waited all this time for that? And I'm like, how dare you? How dare you? How did we even get married?
Oh, no. That's terrible.
No, but she did like it. Now now it's our number one stop when we get into California. It's you got RSA. The first thing you do when you get to San Francisco, at least I do, is I get In-N-Out.
Yeah.
I dragged Micah last year to In-N-Out when we were at RSA.
Chick-fil-A's fries are far more superior.
He says Chick-fil-A fries are better than In-N-Out fries.
Sure, I can agree with that, but imagine, the waffle fries animal style. Like, no can defend.
No one can defend that. It's not kosher, so I don't get it. But I will eat the burgers, and that's like my one sin, because I typically eat kosher. So I'll order like the double with no cheese, and the people look at me all weird. They're like, "No cheese? What kind of human are you?" Like the kind that doesn't eat.
You're breaking up.
I'm sorry. Are we breaking up there? Okay.
Good on my end.
Are we?
You're back now.
All right. Sorry about that. So I said, I order the double with no cheese.
Yeah.
Because it's not kosher, and the lady will look at me and just be like, "Are you serious?" And I'm like, "Yeah. I'm that guy.
Yeah.
I'm that guy."
Hey, do what you got to do.
I love it. Chris, thanks so much for being on the podcast. Again, guys, so you can check out Chris's own podcast, which is secdevops.ai. Follow him on LinkedIn, Twitter, right? You're on Twitter?
I'm on Twitter, yep.
Awesome. Thanks for coming on the show. I really appreciate it. Everyone, thanks for tuning in. We'll be back with more awesome content next week. Until then, have a great afternoon. Make sure you subscribe, 5 stars, and share. We'll be back with more next week. Micah, take us out.